Hello friends, welcome to our channel. Today we will hear the plight of a young woman who has been forcefully separated from her son after going through much suffering in life. Let our main character tell about her painful experience. Hello, I'm a 38-year-old married woman. This is my second marriage. But my story started with my first marriage. I grew up in a poor family in a rural area. I didn't receive a higher education. After graduating from school, I already had suitors who wanted to marry me. I had a lot of suitors since high school as I was a beautiful girl with green eyes and blonde hair. I felt like I was still a child, but my family wanted to marry me off. I had suitors visiting our home to ask for my hand. A year passed. Once my parents told me that yet another suitor would be coming to our place to see me. I was overwhelmed. I couldn't say anything to my family. Preparations were made for their visit. My new suitor was the son of my father's friend from workplace. As our families were having a conversation, I was serving tea and coffee. While serving coffee to our guests, I looked at my potential husband. I had butterflies in my stomach. For the first time, I liked any of my suitors. I had to show him my interest. We made an eye contact. He looked at me with embarrassed eyes and tilted his head. I quickly went back to the kitchen. Our guests left after a while. We were going to have our traditional conversation in the evening. My mom and dad talked positively about my suitor and advised me to accept his marriage proposal. I silently nodded my head as a sign of consent. They were very happy. Things would speed up. We met a few times in person. He was really nice, behaving like a gentleman. I liked him. Soon his parents asked for my hand. I was very excited. We made preparations and the wedding was planned. Everything was progressing as fast as I had expected. A few months later, I had a wedding. I was 20 years when I got married. I had a new home. The first few months of my marriage were a fairy tale. I got pregnant during the first year of our marriage. We would have a son. We were excitedly waiting for our child. In the last months of my pregnancy, my husband started having problems with his business. Although he tried to hide it, I understood that something was wrong. He was always contemplating about something, always unhappy. He didn't even rejoice over the birth of our son. Shortly after my son's birth, I found out that my husband had gone bankrupt and we had nothing left. We had to vacate our house. The only thing to do was to move in with my mother-in-law. Of course, it was very difficult for two families to live together, but we had to move in a short time with what we had left. I was not feeling well because I had just given birth. I was in pain. On the one hand, I was trying to get used to having a baby. On the other hand, I was trying to adapt to the room given to us by my mother-in-law. My mother-in-law was resilient because she was old. She expected me to be just like her, but I was still very young. She wanted me to help her and I was trying my best, but I couldn't keep up with the work. After a while, she started criticizing me. I didn't want to cause any trouble because I had no other options. I was trying my best not to complain. I was constantly working and at the same time taking care of my child. But I still couldn't please anyone. Once I wanted to take a shower. Since there was no hot water, I needed to boil water. My mother-in-law said I had no right to do that and I could only take cold water. She left me in the freezing cold bathroom. I took a shower with cold water. After that day, I had the worst illness of my life. My family could no longer bear to hear me crying over the phone. My father came to my in-laws' place and took me from there. I was hospitalized. After a week, I had recovered, but I realized that I didn't have strength to return to my mother-in-law's house. I had to talk to my husband. My mother-in-law had poisoned my husband with her words. I couldn't believe how much he had changed. My husband didn't want to see me because, in his words, a wife should leave her husband's house like that. They immediately started divorce proceedings. I was in shock. I couldn't understand how he had given up on me so easily. My father told me that I had to accept the situation and that he wouldn't leave me in that house. I couldn't get the custody of my son because I didn't have a job. I couldn't believe that they could separate me from my child. I lost my son in an instant. I no longer see my husband. I had to accept my new life, but I had to change the city. After a few months, I decided to visit my aunt. I had to stay there for a while to feel better. Soon I found a job. I was hired as an assistant to an accountant at a local company. I started my new job with a lot of excitement. For the first time, I was going to stand on my own feet, and I had to do it for my son. I was living alone now. The people in finance department were very nice, and I was doing my job with love. But after returning home in the evenings, I would feel empty. I couldn't get rid of the feeling of emptiness. I was starting to forget my son's face. My hopes that I could find him and reunite with him were also vanishing. My family didn't want me to be alone. They would visit me from time to time. They suggested that I started a new life. They had found a new suitor for me. I was happy with my job and my life, but I was feeling alienated in a big city. I accepted my family's offer. My new suitor was divorced like me and had a daughter. He seemed to be a sincere and honest man. I decided to get married to put my life on track. He had a house in another city. All I had to do was to take my belongings and move to his place. I started to love him over time. He was a really good person. About a year later, I got pregnant again. This time I was going to have a daughter. I was extremely excited to have a child again. My husband's ex-wife had abandoned her child, so the child was staying with us. She was 8 years old. She understood that her mother had left her, but she could not tolerate me being with her father. She constantly damaged her belongings. She would look at me with hateful eyes. I knew it was hard for her. After my daughter was born, I told my stepdaughter that she had a sister, and the little girl seemed to understand that there was another bond between us, even if only to a certain extent. She seemed to love her sister despite her disdain of me. As she grew up, she started to see my kindness towards her, and when she realized that her mother had abandoned her, she accepted me as an older sister, and she herself became an older sister to her sister. Now my daughter has grown up and I have a completely different life. Although I still cannot see my son, I still believe that one day I will find him and will take my son to my new family. I'm convinced of this.